You know what, Rick? You really have changed.
Well, thanks, Morty. I'll always be your grandpa, Morty. I'm just kind of obsessed with crows now.
Hello YouTube, this is DVD Review Studios here, and today we shall be doing a review on Rick and Morty Season 5, featuring the Blu-ray Steelbook edition, which I did an unboxing of this not too long ago, just literally to show off the overall packaging, I guess, and give some generalized thoughts on this season. In this review I shall be featuring the Blu-ray set in more depth and discussing the whole season in thorough detail, which for me, in all honesty, it's very much a mixed bag of ups and downs. I would honestly say it's my least favourite season of the show thus far, but does have a couple of standout episodes, and a lot of what is good about those is really integral to the canonical view of this series, continuing the established storylines relating to Rick's origins, and of course my personal favourite character, which I've voiced previously, and that is Evil Morty. And whilst I wasn't a big fan of certain episodes, yes, that one, I hate that one, we'll get to that momentarily, I do appreciate how the writers made an attempt to sort of splitting up the content we were getting for fans, hoping to see, I guess, a difference compared to what Season 4 had to offer, which when Season 4 was airing, I saw a lot of criticism about how the show really wasn't either all that funny anymore, and that people were bizarrely not really all that interested in a serialized story format. Instead, a lot of people really wanted to see more sort of randomized adventures featuring these characters. And I'll be honest, I'm the complete opposite. The main reason I stuck around for this show was the mystery of our main character and the ongoing story relating to Evil Morty. And in this season, we get more answers really than ever before. But this also opens up even more questions going forward, which I guess is reason enough to stick around for more content. Anyhow, this season features 10 episodes overall, and without any further delay, let's delve into my thoughts on the episodes for Season 5. So first up we have Mort Dinner, Rick Andre. Any relevant sort of pun titles or parody titles, I'll put what they are a parody of in the bottom corner of the screen just to save time. And although this opener wasn't necessarily as strong as other season openers, I thought this episode was pretty fun for the most part. We're introduced to Rick's nemesis, Mr. Nimbus, who is voiced by Dan Harmon, and he is meant to be, I guess, a lifelong nemesis, despite the fact that we've never heard of this character before, and with that in mind, I really hope we do see more of this character in the future, maybe as flashbacks to see how their conflict began. Who knows at this point, but setting things up with the cold opener, Rick and Morty are fleeing a giant alien creature when all hope is lost. Morty gives a final farewell to his crush, Jessica, who bizarrely agrees to go out with him, therefore giving him reason to live. Morty saves them by crashing the ship into Earth's ocean, but this apparently breaks a contract between Nimbus and Rick by touching the ocean, and this line really cracked me up.
We have to go right fucking now. You touched the ocean, Morty.
What's the big...
Oh, fuck!
And so Rick invites Nimbus over for dinner to settle their conflict, where Morty is told to age up some wine using this really bizarre portal technology that we've never actually seen before in the series. It's a world of its own, inhabited by sort of goat-like beings, but time flows much faster in there than it does in the present dimension. And I really did love this concept. It's incredibly creative. And when Morty ages up the wine, where one of the goat people actually helps him and enters the present world, only he goes back to discover the time has basically decayed all that he loved. And this spirals into a ludicrous revenge storyline for Morty, especially when Jessica becomes involved.
Hey, how's it going?
Fuck off, I'm a time god!
Next up is Multiplicity, and honestly, I wasn't really a big fan of this episode on the first viewing. It's what this steelbook is based off of cover art-wise. And I like the concept of the episode. As the viewer, we are basically kept in the dark for the most part of the episode, as to really what is happening, where we don't even know which Smith family is our Smith family. We're introduced to countless variants referred to as replicas, where each Rick appears to be responsible for creating replica versions of the Smith family as decoys to avoid an unknown danger. Turns out that the danger is themselves, where they're all really hunting one another until the last Smith family standing. And there was a lot of really great action and overall some fun creativity throughout, but the payoff is extremely weak in my eyes, based around this bizarre Mr. Poopy Butthole looking character just begging to be hunted.
I'm Mr. Always Wants to Be Hunted.
Yes, and how interesting did you think that would stay?
Next up is a Rick Convenient Mort, and oh man, this was the Heartbreaker episode. I've always found that Rick and Morty manages to achieve so much more from heartfelt writing than deliberately trying to be funny, and when Morty discovers a potential love interest in an environment-saving superhero called Planetina, once she's liberated from being a literal figure for marketing, Morty falls for her where they attempt to start a relationship together. And I love how this was so well represented on screen visually, where we see the text messages between both characters without sort of any spoken dialogue. And this spirals out of control, however, when Planetina suddenly starts murdering those who are guilty of negatively impacting the planet. And Morty just can't accept this. He views this as immoral. And honestly, their breakup scene is one of the most tragic bits of animation from the show. With the relationships this kid has had so far, he really just can't catch a break, it seems. Well, I can't put this one off any longer. Next up we have Rick Dependence Spray. By far the worst episode of Rick and Morty, and I can honestly outright say that I hate it. There are very little to no redeeming qualities about it, and it just comes across as something designed to make you feel all the more uncomfortable. Morty visits Beth at the horse hospital where she works, and he decides to fuck a machine designed to collect horse semen. Rick ends up experimenting on this barrel of horse sperm, as he thinks, which is actually Morty's, only for it to mutate into giant levitating sperm attacking the city. Already you can tell the level of maturity has just sunk to a new low, and it only gets worse. The payoff for this is just horrible. Keeping it a mystery throughout the episode as to whose spaff this actually is, the US president decides to use a giant egg to attract all the spunk to one place and destroy it all, where it's revealed to actually be Summer's egg, Morty's sister, where Morty then has to reveal that it's his sperm all along that they have been trying to destroy. It's such a dumb plot, seriously. And so they blast the fertilized egg into space since one of the sperm cells manages to make the journey, and the Smiths create a giant incest baby. I mean, what the fuck were they thinking? This is by far, this is worse than the Dragon episode, easily. What a poorly executed, grotesque idea, literally a waste of time, money, and animation. Just appalling. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's move on to the next episode, a Mortican Graffiti. This episode was still weak, but there was at least some form of return to the usual standard of some description. Rick starts manipulating Jerry into joining him for Guys Night, and he brings with him a group of Hellraiser-inspired aliens who enjoy suffering, which oddly gives them pleasure. Jerry's insufferably lame attitudes add to this pleasure, therefore meaning that they actually enjoy being around him. And even though it's basic, I liked this plot a lot, but I wasn't really a massive fan of the B-plot where Summer and Morty tried to impress a new kid at the school called Bruce Chutback, and feeling the pressure to make a good impression, they steal Rick's car and take it for a violent joyride. Next up we have Rick and Morty's Fanksploitation Spectacular, another slight improvement over the Spunk episode, especially with this one involving the President character voiced by Keith David, and in yet another petty fight similar to sort of Roadrunner and Coyote, Rick and Morty upset the President by accidentally destroying the US Constitution. Having apparently gone too far, Rick spends the majority of the episode trying to be pardoned for his actions. And this is where the plot gets silly, trying to get close to the President for his pardon, and to keep up with the Thanksgiving kind of theme, Rick and Morty infiltrate the bodies of turkeys to smuggle themselves close to the President, of which the President has already done the same idea with a bunch of super soldiers, making turkey soldiers to fight back. There was a lot of fun action throughout this episode, some really quirky kind of character designs, with a slight satire on the Thanksgiving holiday, but nothing really mind-blowing in my eyes. from this episode. It was just okay. Next up, we have Gotron Genesis Rick Vangelion. Another somewhat mediocre episode in my eyes, but it did have its good points. Morty and Summer are at odds with one another over Rick's obsession with collecting Gotron robots. Obviously inspired by, I would imagine, the Voltron character in particular, sort of anime inspired. And with that, the episode takes inspiration from very sort of gangster and mafia stories as well, but combining this with the anime elements, I kind of felt the inspirations for this one were a little bit messy in my eyes, sort of interesting to say the least, but just didn't really pair up well in my opinion. I did like the internal monologue narration from both Morty and Summer, showing how Summer was getting way in over her head with Rick's obsession, basically trying to please him at the same time. And I also liked the alternative versions of Rick that were shown in this episode, and the anime-looking villains were amusing for what they represented, especially Kendra, guest voiced by Lauren Tom. And building a giant anime robot from multiple sets of these Gotron robots, Kendra attempts to kill Rick only for the giant incest baby of all things from that episode to save the day. A really weird sort of cop-out episode in my eyes. Doesn't really match the level of sci-fi quirkiness Rick and Morty is known for, and I really do hope they just abandon this character, if you can even call it a character at this point. Just enough, please.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay?
Next up is Recternal Friends of the Spotless Mort. And leading up to the finale, I felt these last few episodes were more the usual level of quality I would expect from this show. This one is extremely important, in my opinion, to Rick's character progression, with the ongoing story about his best friend, Bird Person, who was killed and transformed into a cyborg. And although it isn't really explained, Rick kept the body parts of his friend with the intent of putting him back together, and with the Smith family away on vacation, he completes this project, but has to enter Bird Person's mind in order to restore him. And I loved this trippy journey. Loads of great visuals throughout, and a lot of these action sequences really do fill in the gaps for Rick's past, such as how he met Bird Person anyway, and it also explains why Rick is very much a closed book for the most part. He doesn't really open up to anyone as such, and this is down to being rejected by those he cares for most, which is quite sad for what it is. And this includes Bird Person, and I really do love the team-up that was shown throughout this episode with his younger self, where he can only really seem to get along with variants of himself under certain conditions, this obviously being one of those where it was a variant of himself imagined by Bird Person. I thought that was quite creative. And as the show continues, I really do hope we get to see more of that younger self of Rick. Whether or not that's even possible, I'm really not too sure. But I liked how this episode wrapped up where it's revealed that Bird Person and Tammy bizarrely had a child together, and this wakes him up, sort of giving him purpose where he and Rick depart on mutual terms. Next up, we have one of my favourite episodes from this season, and that is Forgetting Sarek Mortshall. And honestly, this was great for seeing Morty stealing the portal gun, trying to fix all the terrible disasters that Rick leaves behind that he's responsible for. And when he's caught topping off the portal fluid, they argue to a point where Rick replaces him with something supposedly less meaningful. And what might that be? Turns out it's just two crows, as chosen by this really condescending spinning wheel, and I love these cruel jokes at Morty's expense, especially since he doesn't really deserve to be treated like this, in my opinion, through the shite that he's gone through. And when trying to top off the portal fluid, I loved this segment where Morty accidentally spills some on his hand, which bizarrely links him to a character called Nick, who has a portal on his thigh. And I love what they did with this character. I feel the mystery surrounding him adds a lot of extra complexity, where he supposedly tried to steal Rick's portal gun at some points, and this is obviously how he has resulted in having part of the portal on his body. And it's also interesting to see how Morty finds this guy's location, and how Nick is actually living in a mental institution. and these scenes had some really funny Terminator references that really got me and caught me off guard.
Damn, what happened to you?
The guards like to beat us on Sundays. Still better than Mondays.
Jeez, what happens then?
They lick our faces when we're tied down.
And so together they plot against Rick as they escape and trash the garage, looking to use the portal technology to their own advantage. And this is where Nick turns on Morty whilst Rick is away being enlightened by the crows, where he discovers an advanced civilization of crows in the process. And one of my favourite scenes from this season is the brutal death of Nick.
Fall in line or I'll make your life a living hell.
No, thank you!
And how Morty severs off his own hand to achieve this. Overall pretty gnarly in my opinion.
What the fuck did you just do?
Cut you out of my life.
And so, by the end of the episode, Rick and the crows remain together, whilst Morty is left behind, which leads us into the finale. And so, here we are with the finale episode, Rick, Mirai, Jack, and this is arguably one of the most revealing episodes of Rick and Morty. For those that were unaware as well, this episode and the previous one were originally aired together, almost like a two-parter back-to-back, which I very much appreciated at the time. And so we see Rick continuing his journey with the crows, now simply known as the Crowman, which takes some really bizarre sort of anime-inspired conventions once again. And Morty tries to get him to return home, and inevitably he does, where Morty takes a serum to look like a middle-aged man, which really cracked me up. And I love this as kind of a fake-out as well, as though 20 years of Rick being the Crowman had actually passed between the characters' interactions, which wasn't the case, thankfully. And when Rick returns home, Morty requires fixing, which means a quick trip over to the Citadel of Ricks. And as expected, this is where shit really does go down, as the main overarching plot of the series takes another fun turn, and honestly, I loved every second of what they were able to achieve with this plot. And so when Morty is fixed, the pair have dinner with the Morty president, who is obviously evil Morty, who reveals his desire to take down the central finite curve. And this is a concept that has been hinted at from the first season, but hasn't really been explained all that much, where a segment of the infinite multiverse timelines are separated from the rest of the multiverse. And what do they have in common? Well, Rick is supposedly the most powerful being in the universe in all of these timelines, which all seem to contain a Morty to join him. And with evil Morty, he is just so sick of Rick and all of his bullshit, where he just literally wants to destroy the central finite curve and leave that section of the known multiverse. And plot-wise, this is fantastic. It really paints the picture that Rick really is a villain and a bad influence on pretty much all Mortys. And although evil Morty's plan is somewhat immoral to an extent, you can really somewhat get behind what he's trying to achieve and see it from his point of view. And I really like this. It's a rarity where we get to see a sympathetic villain, but also a villain that wins. We're also given Rick's backstory, which evil Morty conveniently had possession of. And when Morty wants to know more about this, about his grandfather, all is revealed. And it turns out the stuff from Season 3, Episode 1, about Rick's wife and daughter being killed, was all true. Rick made it his mission to hunt down and destroy the version of himself that ruined his life, making him into a lonely ghost of a man. And he spent years killing as many Ricks as possible until he basically learns to live with his past, it seems. And wrapping up the episode, the Citadel is bizarrely revealed to be a giant doomsday weapon, using the remains of other Ricks and Mortys along with portal fluid to rip open and exit from the central finite curve. And unlike most typical hero/villain stories, evil Morty does in fact win. He succeeds, leaving this reality for a yellow portal having successfully destroyed the central finite curve. And I absolutely love what they did with this. Rick and Morty, along with a handful of others, do survive and manage to escape. And this is where we are left, with one hell of a cliffhanger, taking us into Season 6. And I can't wait to see what happens next. I would consider this a defeat for the main characters, so it will definitely be an interesting continuation to see how they are going to deal with the fallout from what has occurred. Will evil Morty return? I definitely hope so. It seems like ripping a hole into the unknown sections of the multiverse will perhaps bring in more sort of bigger villains for Rick to face. Maybe an evil Jerry, who knows? And so overall, even though I found this season to be a lot weaker in certain areas, it was okay for the most part. Very much my least favourite, like I already mentioned, but it does have some winning episodes and for sure adds a lot more depth to our main character and also our main villain as well, which I think is just as interesting. Anywho, here is the steelbook design, which I mentioned before is based off of the episode Multiplicity, with the Smith family there in the hand-sewn squid outfits. There's the spine, Rick and Morty Season 5. And the back cover, which I really do love the coloration on this and how it kind of shows a back view of what we are seeing on the front cover. And here's a look at the inside artwork for the steelbook. Sadly, which I believe I did mention in my unboxing of this, the disc artwork is non-existent, unfortunately. The US release of this steelbook did thankfully have a disc artwork, but apparently we're not worthy to possess such things, so we'll leave it at that. But there's the inside artwork again, based off of Multiplicity. Overall, some very neat colours that are represented here. And here is the backing card for the steelbook. Total runtime, you're looking 220 minutes on the 10 episodes. Rated A15 here in the UK for strong gory violence, language, sex references, and drug misuse. And there's a list of the bonus features. Overall, some interesting ones, but I'll be honest, we've definitely had better in the past. The one thing that I am really disappointed about is the lack of audio commentaries. I like to hear the creators of the show talk about their shows whilst watching the shows. It's more of a, I guess, a reactionary kind of thing from the people that actually developed these stories, and I think that's really the most insightful way for any sort of behind-the-scenes kind of thing to come across when it comes to learning more about a certain episode of a series that you really do enjoy. But for what we got some interesting stuff nonetheless. I quite like the inside the episode featurettes for each individual one. The B-story generator was quite interesting, sort of giving random hypothetical episode ideas, to say the least, and I do really love anything relating to the sort of animation and compositing sort of stuff, where we see some heavy behind-the-scenes sort of looks at how difficult and sort of time-consuming a lot of the animation is when it comes to Rick and Morty and the amount of effort that goes into a show such as this. So that's going to do it for my review on Rick and Morty Season 5. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, be sure to leave me a like down below. Let me know in the comments, how did you feel about this season? This season does seem to be a little bit of a controversial one amongst the fans, so I'd be delighted to hear your thoughts and opinions down below. You can check out my other Rick and Morty reviews on the channel if you are interested, and for more content, be sure to subscribe.
Are you threatening me?